Welcome to the Abundance Code, the podcast where we delve into the secrets of unlocking abundance in mind, money, and meaning. I'm your host, Jason Stanley.
If you can shift your perspective to see things from the other person's point of view, now you're in a much better position to start negotiating. You can be upbeat, you can cast a vision, you can do all these different things, but if you can't effectively communicate with people, and you can't effectively inspire them to help you along your journey, then you're not going to get anywhere. Welcome back to the Abundance Code, where we discuss mind, money, and meaning. I'm Jason Stanley. So this time, let's talk about how we receive information and how we perceive the world around us. Over the years, I've come to realize that a lot of times when I enter into a conversation, or I'm entering into a meeting, or entering into an interaction with people, right? Ultimately, whatever mindset that I'm in at that point in time will affect how I receive that information. And that becomes my perception, and my perception becomes my reality. And that's how we all kind of live in this world. But is it the right way to do things? I think a lot of times you can set yourself apart and start to see things in a different way by changing the way that you look at things, by changing the mindset that you enter into a conversation. So if we're entering into a conversation with the idea that somebody's out to get us, or that somebody is going to wrong us, and that type of thing, we very much guard against it. We look for the problems in everything that they say to us. Or if we are reading something, or we're looking at something and we're going into it with this idea that somehow we're going to be taken advantage of, it will change the way that we receive that information. And we may miss some things doing that. And it may change the way that we receive the information. Our perspectives, or our perceptions really drive our reality in a lot of ways. And we really only need to shift how we look at it, or change our perspective to start seeing things from a different angle. And when you're communicating with other people, I think one of the lost arts is verbal communication with people. We spend so much time on social media. We spend so much time, putting out information stuff. And you see these debates break out on social media where people are standing their ground and that kind of thing. And we call them keyboard warriors, right? It's just people, trying to drive their point home, their belief systems. The problem with that is it's all based on your own perceptions of stuff. And everybody is standing with their own perceptions, their own belief systems. And like we talked about before, your belief systems don't always have to be based in a reality, right? Like I told you before, if you grew up here in the United States, chances are, at some point in time you believed in Santa Claus, and if somebody told you that Santa didn't exist, you would have thought that they were crazy, you would have thought that they were a liar, and so on and so forth. So we can have beliefs that don't necessarily have to be grounded in fact. We have beliefs that don't necessarily have to be grounded in reason. We have beliefs a lot of times that are just our beliefs. And it doesn't make them right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just our core beliefs. But the problem is we have differing beliefs, right? Even across similar types of people, you have differing beliefs. And so as you're communicating with people, and as you're talking to people, especially in business and those kinds of things, if you can shift your perspective to see things from the other person's point of view, now you're in a much better position to start negotiating, to start having that conversation. And you can actually persuade people much easier that way. I learned this a long time ago, because I've spent most of my life in some sort of sales. And a typical sales model is, hey, this is what I have. Let me tell you about the features and benefits of it, and you should buy it. And then, the person gives you an objection, and then you try to overcome that objection. And the problem with that is it just doesn't work. because when you create friction or you create tension in a conversation or a relationship, that tension stays until one person gives, right? And so if you're trying to prove to somebody that you're right all the time, and they're trying to prove they're right, nothing's going to happen, right? And so one of the best ways to move a conversation or move a conflict forward, in my opinion, is simply agreeing. So a lot of times if I do this, I'll do this with my wife even, is if I've done something and she's upset about it, rather than argue back and forth, and I do argue some, but rather than argue back and forth, disarming the conversation by saying, you know what, you're right. And, that gives you control. Then you can then move that conversation to a different, in a different way. Whereas if I'm sitting there arguing about something, now I'm just creating more and more tension. And we do that with each other as humans. And I think, I'll go back to and say, I think one of the lost arts in our world today is the ability to communicate and communicate effectively with one another, and to be able to sit down and have a conversation with somebody who has differing beliefs and differing viewpoints than you, and still have a mutual respect for one another. We live in a world right now where we're almost tribal in our thinking, and tribalism actually brings about more violence. It brings about more conflict, and so on and so forth. When we think in more terms of openness and that kind of stuff, we can accomplish so much more. And so how does this apply? How does this apply to you? How does this apply to your life? How does this apply to business? So I use this all the time in business. I've told you I work in finance. We do stock market investments and stuff like that. And people's belief systems on how money works, how the market works, on political events and stuff, really drive their psychology and the way that they receive information from us. It's been interesting over the years. I've had clients that, they have this belief that, the economy's bad, right? And really, in reality, the economy's been really good during that time period, right? I'm not saying that that's the case right now, but in the time period that I was talking to them. But their belief was that the economy was bad, therefore their investments had to be bad. And they were shocked to learn that they weren't. And it was based on their own perception or what they had going on in their own life. So maybe they had something chaotic happening in their own life that made them feel like things weren't good outside of that. And I've always said that our outside world is a mere reflection of our inner world, of what we have going on between our own two ears. And so we see this happen in a lot of different ways. Recently I was talking to my wife about a situation, and, we were dealing with somebody who was very upset about services and stuff like that. And the language that they used was really interesting. They were, saying, well, I don't trust this person. They abandoned me and stuff like that. And it only took stepping back and looking at that person's situation to understand why they were using that type of language. They're having trouble in their personal relationship, and instead of dealing with the personal relationship because they didn't want to create conflict there, they were moving that conflict over to another area of their life. And so really the complaints had nothing to do with anything that we were doing or anything like that. It had to do with their own perceptions of their world at that point in time. And so once I understood that, I could better communicate with that person. It doesn't mean that they were invalid in their frustrations with things. But, the language that they used, like I said, was, more like language that you would use if you were in a relationship with somebody. I don't trust them. They abandoned me, that kind of stuff. Those are terms that you use when you're in a relationship. They're not terms that you use typically in a business setting. And so once I recognized that, then I could change the way that I was communicating with that person to communicate more in their mindset, and to come alongside them, offer solutions, rather than trying to pull against them and say, oh, no, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong, and that kind of stuff. Because once we tell somebody they're wrong, they want to stand their ground. And so really, I guess what I would say is this is more conversation or more lesson around, things, the ways that you communicate with people. Really, this is, I look at this episode as more just a lesson around general communication. How do we communicate when we get in business and stuff like that? You can be upbeat, you can cast a vision, you can do all these different things, but if you can't effectively communicate with people and you can't effectively inspire them to help you along your journey, then you're not going to get anywhere. And so, rather than disagreeing all the time, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to agree, right? There's a terrific book, and most people have heard of it at least. Some people have actually read it. I recommend it to all of our new hires because I think again, it's just a lost art, and it's called How to Win Friends, Influence People, and it's by Dale Carnegie. And, in that book, he points out that what is there to win by proving that you're right, other than the own accolades in your own mind? So if you know somebody's giving information and it's inaccurate information, you're in the conversation with them, let them give it, because in their mind that's correct, and you don't gain any ground with that person by trying to prove them wrong. So instead, let them, continue to give the information, receive the information, and then you can say, I agree, and start moving that conversation in a different manner. One of the things that you can do straight out of the gate when you're meeting somebody new, or you're going into a business negotiation, or you're meeting with a prospective client or something like that, one of the very first things you can do is something called mirroring and matching. So you take the same body posture, you sit like they sit, you do some of the same mannerisms. Don't do everything the same, right? This isn't the copycat thing where you say exactly what they say, you do exactly what they do. If they scratch their nose, you scratch your nose, kind of thing. But if they have a mannerism that they do on a regular basis, right? I use my hands a lot, so maybe they do this a lot or something like that. So when you're talking, you start doing that occasionally as well. That immediately creates a bond, right? Because we like people that are like us, and it creates a connection, right? And so these are things that I do on a regular basis. when I sit down to communicate with somebody, I'll take the tone of voice that they have. If they're real upbeat and real lively, I'll be real upbeat and real lively, and that kind of thing. Tony Robbins talks about this quite a bit as well, and it works. It's a great tool to use, and it allows for you to effectively communicate. In the book, How to Win Friends, Influence People, it talks about this stuff as well. It allows for you to effectively communicate. And communication is key if you want to build connections. And as your connections grow, right, your opportunities grow. And it is a lot of times we get lulled into this fallacy that we have a lot of connections because we have a lot of followers on Instagram, or we got a lot of friends on Facebook and that kind of stuff. And I will tell you that I don't think that those are real connections. Those are people that are just nosy most of the time. A lot of the people that I'm friends with on Facebook and stuff like that, I don't communicate with on a regular basis. I don't see them. I don't talk to them. I see what they post, right? And that's people's lives that they want to project out to the world, right? It's very rare that you see somebody upset on Facebook, and then even if you do, you're like, oh Lord, why are you airing your dirty laundry on Facebook or something like that, and so, instead, this is the communication between two people, and building connections, building a relationship, network, if you will help make you more successful in life in all areas, right? And as my network has grown, the opportunities that I'm exposed to has grown, right? A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, you have to have money to make money, and so on and so forth. And I would say absolutely that is not the case. Rather, it is you have to have connections, right? The more connections you make and the more relationships you have, the more you're going to be exposed to different things. And you have to be able to make these connections with people that are where you want to be, right? Can't just be people right where you're at, because then you don't really get ahead. It has to be people that are where you want to be. So people that are sometimes outside of your comfort zone, and going and intermingling with people. And so then it becomes very important to know how to communicate with people. How do you create a bond with somebody? How do you connect with them, right? And it's not, it's learning about people. It's taking the time to look at the world in a different way. And the more you spend learning about other people, the better at communication you become. A lot of times we become very self-absorbed. We live in a very self-absorbed world where, everything from TikTok videos to whatever is all look at me, 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 right? And we're very highly focused on ourselves. If you don't believe me, you've probably been driving down the road and you make the comment of, oh, look at that idiot in that car, right? You don't know that person. Could be one of the smartest people you've ever met in your entire life. And I promise, they're probably not an idiot. They're probably a rocket scientist or something like that. We talk about people like that because we don't want to have to look at ourselves. We don't want to have to say, well, what am I doing that's contributing to that? What am I doing that's affecting that or causing that? So maybe it is that you're driving in the left lane under the speed limit, and so somebody has to jet around you in the right lane, or maybe you're distracted and you cause somebody else to do something different. I'm not saying that every situation is like that, but my point is that a lot of times we'll lump people together in these by saying these things, so we don't really have to look at the world from their perspective. Maybe that person who's driving faster than you, right? If we shift paradigms a little bit and look at it a different way, maybe that person who's driving faster is rushing to the hospital because they have a loved one that's not going to be in the world much longer, and they want to be there when they pass on. Does that change your perspective? Probably does. And so, your perception says, oh, that person's an idiot. They're driving so fast. They're driving so erratic. But when you back off and you say, wait, maybe there's something happening in that person's life I don't know about. Now that changes your perspective on them. And it opens you up to be able to see things in a different light. Again, I'm not saying that's always the case. Yes, there's absolutely, jerks in the world. There's absolutely people that are rude. There's absolutely people that'll take advantage of you and that kind of stuff. But when your perception is that everybody's trying to hurt you or take advantage of you, then your how you receive information will be tainted by that viewpoint. If you look at the world in terms of, hey, I don't know what that person has going on, but I want to learn what they have going on, to understand their position, their perspective, and their perceptions on life. Now all of a sudden you can connect with people and you can communicate with them effectively. And in doing so, you start to build that bond. And then when you build that bond, now you start to build that network. And network is huge. Network's one of the most important things in our world, in our life. And we think that we don't need it. We think that we can survive just completely on our own. History says otherwise. And this is why we crave connections, even false connections like Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff, right? What happens every single time we get a like? We get a dopamine shot, right? And our brains do the same thing when we create connections in person, when we create connections with each other. We still get dopamine. When we're happy to see somebody, we get that dopamine release. And so communication, I think, is probably one of the most important things to learn. So as you're looking at things to pick up, things to practice, classes to take, courses to take, it's not necessarily even about public speaking, but just knowing how to communicate effectively. Again, I think it's a lost art. It used to be some emphasis on, in school growing up, you'd have speech class, you'd have different, debate classes and stuff like that. And when I was younger, my debate class was really interesting. It wasn't an argument. You would have a debate, but it wasn't in an argument format. It was based on facts and so on and so forth. And now today you see people that debate and all they're doing is talking over each other. If you look at presidential debates or whatever over the past couple of years, it's just how many barbs can I throw at somebody? How many, likes can I get? That kind of stuff. And so instead of doing that, changing your perspective, changing how you look at something, and seeing something from somebody else's point of view will help make you so much better in so many different things. And also, too, it gives you the ability to guide a conversation. So I'll give you an example. When I first started in the business, I was out meeting people, and, I was trying to build my client base and that kind of stuff. And I recognized that people get in mindsets. And I actually was going door to door in the beginning. And I would go knock on doors, and people's immediate reaction to somebody when they knock on their doors, how do I get this person off my doorstep, right? That's where their mind goes. That's where my mind goes when somebody knocks on my door, is how do I get this person off my doorstep? Because we're apprehensive about it. It feels disruptive and that kind of stuff. And so I said, well, if I can interrupt their pattern of thinking and get them having a conversation, then I probably can start to have a connection with them. And so, there's a lot of different ways you can interrupt people's patterns of thinking. Your parents did it when you were a kid. When you'd start crying and you'd be really upset about something, as a little kid, your parents would interrupt your pattern of thinking, right? How many times have you done it with a little kid? Kids crying, you go, oh, look at that. And, all of a sudden their attention's gone and they've interrupted that pattern of thinking. And we do this as adults too. We get into these patterns of thinking. So every time I knocked on the door, what I recognized is that people were trying to get me off their doorstep. And so what I did was I interrupted that pattern. And it was very simple. I would knock on the door and say, hey, look, I'm very sorry. I know you don't like it when people knock on your door. And quite frankly, this isn't the most comfortable thing in the world for me to do either. Is it okay if I take a second to tell you why I'm here? And then we can decide if we want to talk or if I just need to move on. And 9 times out of 10, they would start laughing, right? And then the conversation started happening. And we've done that. I do that all the time now. I use those same kind of pattern interrupts. When I know somebody's going to have a way of thinking, I use that same kind of pattern interrupt. And then on the same hand, if somebody that I met or that I have met, and I was talking to them and they would say, oh, now's a horrible time to invest, right? Market's down. Oh, now's a horrible time to invest. Everything's bad. It's horrible. That's their perception. And their perception is their reality. And so instead of trying to prove to them why there were opportunities, instead of trying to prove to them there were good things, I would just simply say, you know what? You're exactly right. That's why we work so hard to make sure our clients are protected in times like these. What are you doing? And so now I've agreed with them. I've moved alongside of them. And by asking them another question, I now control the conversation. And whoever's controlling that conversation can drive the direction of that conversation, And so this is maybe a little bit of sales technique for you to learn as well, that I've had success with, and maybe you'll have some success with it as well. But, the reality is we sell ourselves. We're selling ourselves. Anytime we're entering into a new conversation, new relationship, a new meeting of somebody, we're selling ourselves. And the best way to sell yourself is to actually learn as much about the other person as you can possibly learn. People love to talk about themselves. It's their favorite thing. They say, psychologists say that the 2 things that most people really like more than anything else is hearing their own name and talking about themselves, because we like to share our story. We want to share that information with people. We want to show that we're important. We want to show that we matter and that kind of stuff. So if you're the one asking the questions, you're the one directing the conversation. And you can usually get people all on the same page just simply by asking those questions. And it needs to be done in a manner that is authentic, right? It can't be, the I gotcha type of questions, right? Where you're trying to corner somebody in and get them, to prove them wrong. It needs to be done in an authentic manner, and you're actually interested in trying to learn about them. And the more that you learn about people, right, the more that you can influence people. And the more that you can influence people, the more that you can accomplish in life, because you can't do all this stuff alone, right? Even people who have terrific podcasts, take somebody like Joe Rogan or something like that. They have an entire team that's helping them with that. They have entire teams of people that they have to keep inspired to want to be a part of that. And it's a little easier, the more successful that they are. But yeah, I mean, so think about those things. Think about how we communicate. Think about how you communicate. And so the next time you're, in your car and you're driving, somebody ticks you off, instead of letting them get you angry, which I lose this one too, right? It's not the easiest thing to do. It's easy to get angry with people. But what I try to do is very quickly shift that and say, all right, maybe they have something going on I don't know about. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Maybe they, have something happening that I'm not aware of. And in doing so, I can control my own emotions as well. So I hope you found this a little bit helpful, but I do think that communication is absolutely paramount, and it is a lost art. And I say it's an art because, we all enter into a conversation with our own perspectives on life and our own perception on life. And if we're having a good day, a lot of times the information that we receive will feel good, even the bad information. If we're having a bad day, even good information can feel bad. And recognizing where you're at, recognizing your own mindset when you enter into a conversation, when you enter into a meeting, when you enter into whatever it is that you're learning about, will affect how you receive that information. And once you start to learn that, now you can start to change how you receive information. And then also, too, how you direct a conversation. So next time you're with your spouse and you guys, start to get in an argument or something, just simply saying, hey, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. How do we fix this? And, now you started to change the conversation. You disarm it. You can't have conflict if you're agreeing, right? And it's a very simple process, very simple thing. It takes a little bit of humility to do, though. And it's easy to, want to stand your ground, because we all want to be justified in what we believe. We all want to be justified and want everybody else to see everything from our perspective. We just don't necessarily want to see it from theirs. And so if you can be that rare person that sees things from somebody else's perspective and sees things from somebody else's point of view, you're going to be much better off than most people in the world. And you're going to be able to do things and you're going to be able to do things. You're going to be able to inspire people to do a lot of really cool things. So until next time, as I have always said, let's buck the status quo in order to grow, and we'll talk to you soon.